Thank you all for joining us. I'm Kristen Craig, President of the Terre Haute Chamber of Commerce, and welcome you all to our monthly advocacy forum. This month's event is a little bit different in that we're going to focus just strictly on the COVID-19 liability questions and hear a little bit about what those bills entail and why they're so important for the business community. But we do host these forums every month. That we invite our local legislators to come in and give us an update on what's happening with the session and keep us apprised of what we need to be watching. These are sponsored by Wabash Valley Asphalt. I have our sponsor sitting over here with me today, John Collette, who also happens to be the chair of the Chamber Board this year. Also want to recognize we have Sarah Smith with us, who is our advocacy chair for the year. So again, thank you all for joining us. I'll go ahead and introduce well, first of all, I'll do some housekeeping notes. Sadly, no one volunteered for the cat filter. We'll try that next time. But we are going to be recording today's session, and it will be posted later on our website. If you have questions, please use the chat feature to submit those. We should have time for questions and answers at the end. It's just a little bit more manageable if you can submit those via chat, and Jesse and I will be keeping an eye on those and then forward the questions along to our speakers throughout. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. We're joined by Senator Mark Messmer, who is the Majority Floor Leader. Senator Messmer was elected, I think, in 2008 to the House of Representatives, in 2014 to the Indiana Senate. He serves on a variety of committees, including Environmental Affairs, Joint Rules and Legislative Procedure, Public Policy, and Tax and Fiscal Policy. So we're very excited to have Senator Messmer here today to talk about these COVID liability bills. I'll also go ahead and mention our other two legislators that we have joining us as well. We have our very own Senator John Ford, who we all know. He's from District 38, of course, elected in 2014, is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, he's a member of Elections, Family and Children's Services, Appropriations, and Public Policy. So happy to have you here as usual, John. And then we also have Representative Pfaff with us today, Representative Tonya Pfaff, sorry, I forgot your first name there for a minute. She is, of course, from District 43, elected in 2008, and serves on Elections and Apportionment Committee. You'll have to tell, I'm not sure what apportionment means. You'll have to tell me about that at some point. You also serve on the Budget Writing, Ways and Means Committee, as well as the Education Committee. So thank you, Representative Pfaff, for joining us today. So with that, I will kind of turn it back over to Senator Messmer to kick things off and perhaps just give us an overview of the two COVID liability bills and where we're at with things.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me this morning. Senate Bill 1 is going to end up being the primary, COVID-19 business liability bill for the session. Representative Tor and I have worked closely on that bill and components that he felt were, not in Senate bill, that some pieces of it that were in House Bill 1002, and as we move through the Senate Bill 1 through the Senate, we merged the pieces that he felt were kind of critical that I didn't have included in my original Senate Bill 1 as we filed it. And so we've got those merged, and we've tweaked them as things didn't maybe end up landing where we wanted through the House committee and on the floor in the House, and really got the bill to a point where it passed yesterday 72-21 in the House. Very pleased for that. We'll have to do a concurrence vote on Monday. But see no worries on that bill. We had good bipartisan support the first half of the session, and expect to have the same Monday on the final passage of the bill. But there might be a few pieces of maybe medical related issues we want to try to tweak and tackle through 1002. The universities had some concerns about their potential class action lawsuit exposure from changes they had to make in the spring, due to COVID-19 issues. So we'll see what else we can work through in 1002, but it'll be very specific, small issues that aren't really the over-encompassing, overall, business, nonprofit, everybody that's included in Senate Bill 1. It covers everybody in the state. So What's left in 1002 will remain to be seen. We'll work through that. We didn't want to rush that through because a lot of those details have to be very nuanced, and I mean, you know, every word can matter in a piece of legislation like Senate Bill 1 or 1002. So Senate Bill 1 will be the bill for session, and very pleased to see where it's at. The start of the bill, really the nexus of the bill started at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the first emergency order, as House and Senate leadership started meetings with the governor in mid-April, you know, talking about some reopening plans and priorities of how things should, you know, we felt needed to start the reopening phases. One of our first requests was to include some COVID-19 civil liability protections within his executive orders. And his legal staff, you know, combed through the Title 10 emergency, you know, order provisions, and they just didn't feel like they had statutory authority to do that. People that were listed as essential businesses that really needed to remain open at the front end of COVID-19. There was a big concern right out of the gate that, you know, what kind of exposure were they going to be open to, you know, for people saying, hey, you know, I got, you know, COVID-19 in your store or at your place of business, or, you know, I mean, just the variety of essential businesses that were concerned, you know, about that right out of the gate. So, you know, April, May, June, we were trying to, you know, kept encouraging him in those early meetings to include that. Mid-June, they said, you know, we just don't think we can. You guys are going to have to solve it legislatively, either at the federal government, you know, for the whole country, or we can do it, you know, state by state. So at that point, I started looking at what other states, Oklahoma, Utah, South Carolina, Tennessee, you know, a bunch of states had passed some, you know, early versions of COVID-19 liability protections, and they all really had the same framework. They all had a gross negligence, willful and wanton misconduct standard, you know, that you had to be exceed to be potentially liable, you know, for a tort lawsuit. And we looked at some states that included businesses with personal protective equipment manufacturing, that, you know, in response to filling the voids for COVID-19. So we looked at all those, you know, what other states had done to set the framework for the bill, but then you have to make it specific to our, you know, to our code sites, and you know, work through that through the fall, and met with business leaders, nonprofit folks, church leaders, local government leaders, and everybody really had the same concern about, you know, even if they're trying to do, you know, the best job possible to protect their students, to protect their employees, their customers, you know, everybody just, you know, feared that looming cloud of you know, civil lawsuits, and the likelihood of losing one of those was probably not great, but the cost to defend one, I mean, you could spend tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to defend yourself in a, you know, going through deposition and a hearing, and I mean, it would have cost the business community, businesses, schools, nonprofits, everybody was in the same boat. I mean, there was really no community, you know, festivals of any kind last summer, you know, just for fear that somebody would claim exposure to COVID-19 and you know, bankrupt their organization, or, you know, I guess you can't bankrupt the nonprofit, but you can you know, end the organization. So that looming cloud of uncertainty, we felt from Senate leadership's perspective from the start of this, to ever get back to normal, and I don't want a new normal, you know, we all want normal, but we're never going to get back to normal if that fear of that pending litigation just hangs over society. So that was why we made it our, you know, Senate Bill 1 priority, and really, I mean, I greatly appreciated, you know, all the stakeholders that gave great input. I appreciate Representative Tor's close work, you know, with me all the way through, you know, the construction of the final details of the bill to make sure we got it in a pretty good spot. One of the concerns we dealt with in the testimony in the House and Senate committees was legitimate. It was a legitimate concern that the folks who had, you know, parents who had died in nursing homes, you know, and we wanted to make sure they were protected from, you know, COVID transmission issues. But I mean, there was a big concern about non-COVID related issues, and making sure this bill didn't give them, you know, unnecessary and unnecessarily high protections from other things unrelated to COVID. So, threading that needle down to the end, working with, I mean, we have a lot of attorneys on our side of the state house. There's not so many on the House side, but the Senate side, and people who deal in that space. And we're, truly concerned not to create a big loophole unintendedly. And so work diligently with the nursing home folks, with the AARP folks, with Senator Cook was a big asset, for me on that. Senator Bray, both practicing attorneys, and we really wanted to make sure we got that in a good spot, and really feel confident that we did. It'll give everybody COVID-19, transmission protection from unless you exceed gross negligence or willful and wanton misconduct. And one of the issues that came up in the Senate committee was a nursing home had active COVID in their nursing home. A family was calling looking for a place to send their dad for treatment of recovery from a surgery. They said, no, we have no COVID here, and in fact they did, and they knew it, and they sent their dad, and 3 weeks later he had died of COVID. And so we added fraud and to the things that you not get protection from, and intentional tortious acts, which, I mean, actions that would be completely belligerent to following any safety protocols. So I mean, I feel like we've got a good basis of protection for everybody who's doing their best to protect employees, workers, customers, students. But if you're a bad actor, you're probably not going to get protected. But it's going to be a rare circumstance where somebody is just that flippant with the rules. But if they are, don't expect to be covered, by Senate Bill 1. So feel great about where we ended up. I think we're going to end up with probably one of the strongest model pieces of legislation for the country if people are looking for something to follow in what we've got in this product, and very, very pleased with all the help that people gave in putting it together.
Excellent. Well, our board of directors at the chamber reviewed the legislation, both pieces, SB1 and HB1002, and decided last week that these were both bills that we wanted to support moving forward. We don't always have bills each legislative session that we are actively supporting, but these were two that we felt were important enough. The board felt were important enough to put our official stamp of approval on. So I know a letter went out yesterday to you and then Representative Tor as well to show our support for these particular bills, and many other chambers around the state I know are also endorsing as well. So, appreciative of your efforts in moving it forward. I might switch to Senator Ford for just a minute. John, is there any conversation you would like to add to this?
I think Mark, covered it pretty well. I think, the only thing I might add is it is retroactive back to beginning of March.
Good point.
And there is a sunset, and is that the 2024 mark?
Yep. Yeah, and that'll give us time. I mean, if COVID issues, drift off the radar screen, I mean, it'll give it time to just let the liability protections that, because they're COVID-19 specific. And if it continues to hang around and be a problem for years, we can either move the sunset date out or take the sunset date off. And it does go into effect upon passage. So we're going to pass the bill Monday. I would expect the governor to sign it Tuesday, and it goes into effect immediately and is retroactive to March 1 of last year. So I felt that was a very, very important feature as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think they, Senator Messmer has done a great job on this bill, and Jerry Tor on the House side. And I think they've really listened to a lot of different stakeholders. And to Senator Messmer's point, early on, I was, folks like the school corporations have reached out to me, manufacturers, lots of concern on this issue. So I'm really happy that next week we'll have a resolution for this issue.
Representative Pfaff, is there anything you would like to add? I know you mentioned at the beginning that you did vote for it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I actually like the Senate Bill 1 better than the House one. I think It's a little tighter. It has a longer set date. I believe House Bill 01 was, I think I want to say 2023, and so I'm glad it's 2024 in the Senate Bill 1. We just voted on it yesterday, and yet supported both of them. I just think it's really, really important for all of you that are tuning in, but COVID's going to continue to evolve. I don't, I think we all thought it was going to be done by now, or at least I did. And it's just going to kind of stick around. So I'm sure we're going to continue these conversations. This is not one and done. So thank you for all the work in the Senate. I think they're pretty decent bills.
We've got a couple of questions that are popping up in the chat that I think we'll go ahead and address now, if you don't mind. We may have addressed this first one about the protections being permanent or temporary. We talked about them being retroactive to March and going through to 2024. And are there any actions employers need to take for the protections to apply?
I would say, just follow good safety protocols. Have your PPE available for your employees as needed. Do good workplace separation as best you can. Wear a mask when people have to work close to each other. That there's not a heck of a lot more you can do. But just support good common sense safety practices. And the gross negligence standard. You're going to have to be pretty belligerently ignoring your employees. But really, we were very careful in Senate Bill 1 to make sure we exempted any overlap with OSHA rules, unemployment rules, or workman's comp rules. Those are completely untouched by Senate Bill 1. And if you have a workplace where you feel your employment situation is unsafe, if you call OSHA and have them come and inspect, and they're going to be there that day or the next day, there will be little to no response time for OSHA to be at your doorstep if your employer is conducting work in an unsafe manner. And we wanted to make sure that those provisions stayed in place to where employee protection is not sacrificed at the point of business and nonprofit and volunteers. And no matter where you're at, if you're at your church, if you're at your school, you follow the basic safety protocols that have been put in place. And I just cannot, I can't imagine you're going to have any fear of anybody successfully challenging, you and saying you were the cause of their COVID-19 situation.
Another question kind of around that, the specific definitions for gross negligence. It sounds like you kind of added some wording as the process has gone along to help define what that looks like. But are there, very specific definitions included right now?
Well, we use about 140 places in different legal sections of our Indiana code. The standard of gross negligence and willful and wanton misconduct are listed throughout code, but they are specifically not defined individually, because what gross negligence would be at an Ace Hardware store is going to be completely different than what gross negligence is at your hospital in your community. So the standard of expectations for different environments are vastly different. What a restaurant worker might have to do, versus you having friends over for dinner at your house. The health and safety standards at a public place are different than than in your home. And so to say what's gross negligence, there is no definition in code, but it's really proved through court precedent, over time, and really, if somebody's, gross negligence at your situation is what the court hearing and trials and all that would be, and evidence that would be brought forth. So there's no one standard for gross negligence, for every situation, because it would be impossible, to put a definition that worked for every situation in society. And that's, unfortunately or fortunately, that's where the trial process and evidence and all that would bear that out. But no matter where you're at, it here again, just Gross negligence is going to be, pretty well ignoring safety protocols for, trying to deal with, with this virus, and depending on your situation, the health protocols you're going to have to follow are going to be, higher. The more, the more closely you deal with the patient or the customer, health standards for somebody who's in the cosmetology business is different from somebody who runs a grocery store. So, I mean, it's going to vary. But I mean, people within that industry are going to know what, what protocols are important, whether, so whether you're in the hotel lodging business, whether you're in the restaurant business, medical profession, nursing home profession, retail, groceries, clothing stores. I mean, it's gonna be different in about every scenario, but so not easy to craft one. And we looked at, do we set in our, in my bill earlier, I looked at, do I put in something that says you are covered as long as you follow CDC guidelines? And I thought, that might be a good backstop that says, you're not going to be held to gross negligence if you follow, state or local or federal, protocols. Well, the problem is from March to May to June to August they've changed many times on what was. The more we've learned, the more those protocols have changed over time. And so what was good in March might not have been good in November. And so we really, I mean, since it's a moving target and probably will continue to be a moving target, what protocol were you following and when were you following it? And how do you prove that you followed 9 out of 10 protocols, and was that gross negligence? Or so, I mean, we thought about that, talked about that in Senate committee, and really couldn't find a good spot to land for trying to define what gross negligence was or wasn't. I mean, it's just really gonna vary, for every business scenario, every nonprofit scenario. What's good for a soccer coach, isn't going to be the same as somebody who's a massage therapist. So I mean, it's just unfortunately not easy to just put one definition out there. But I mean, historical court precedent, and the process of going through, and if somebody feels that they clearly got it from you and they can prove it, and safety protocols were not followed, I mean, that's unfortunately what's going to be left to hash through. But I think we've created enough guardrails around the process that it's going to have to be pretty solid evidence that you have, and the person's going to have to show complete disregard for for safety procedures to be successful.
Another question kind of around the evolution of COVID, now as we're seeing new variants pop up. So the language in this bill is just specific to COVID-19, but was there any conversation around, as the virus changes and becomes—
We did add mutations of COVID-19 as well, because it's gonna, I mean, as all viruses do, they do, change and mutate, and we looked at it was the right word, mutations or variants, and I think our, the legal team over at LSA decided the mutations, of the COVID-19 was the correct legal definition to use, just, looking at medical definitions across the country. So, but we do allow for mutations of it as well.
Very good. Another question from President Rob Coons with Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology about, originally my understanding was that the bill included public universities but not private colleges. Private colleges have the same exposure as public universities and have been subject to the same challenges dealing with COVID-19, and in many cases with fewer resources. It sounds like private colleges and universities are now included as well, correct?
They have been in Senate Bill 1 all along. I think in 1002, the public universities were included, but the definition for private universities was not. But I mean, that is probably true of 1002, but I mean, our definitions in Senate Bill 1, from COVID-19 transmission apply to everybody. I think we picked up every legal definition we could find, and then we just said basically the final one is, you know, anybody else we missed. So we made sure it's broad. It covers everybody from COVID-19, you know, exposure, you know, transmission. Now, I mean, we haven't been able to tackle the, you know, the issue of, you know, students who felt the change of their, you know, education format, you know, due to COVID-19. They felt that was a violation of their tuition agreement, and that's not, I mean, that's not been tackled. That gets into contract law issues, and we were very specific to make sure we weren't trying to go back and override, you know, contract law, because then you get into constitutional issues if you impede a contract, you know, retroactively. There's going to be constitutional questions with that. So we made sure we clearly kept the boundaries to just simply, you know, civil, what they call tort liability, for financial, you know, harm and we prohibited class action lawsuits in Senate Bill 1, you know, due to COVID-19 exposure. But it doesn't address the concern that some of the universities have, you know, from the tuition challenge. So, I mean, if that's going to get remedied, that'll be in House Bill 1002, and it will include public and private universities. I mean, that's one issue we need to try to get a grip on yet, you know, as session continues.
Okay, thank you. Question from Brian Koister, one of our board members. What groups, if any, are opposed to the legislation?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
I'm sorry, what groups, if any, are opposed to the legislation? I think I saw at one point maybe Indiana Lawyers Association had some questions.
They were neutral on the bill. I mean, AARP was probably the only one opposed early because we hadn't clarified, you know, that this would give protection to nursing homes for things outside of COVID-19. And I think the AFL-CIO testified in opposition. I think everybody testified either neutral or support in the Senate to Senate Bill 1. AFL-CIO came out opposed because they were concerned about not enough employee protections. And so we really tried to you know, get that issue you know, completely buffered out as well. I mean, other than that, there really was, I mean, all the way through, the trial lawyers were neutral. I think AARP was neutral. Wasn't really expecting them to ever be supportive, but I think we kept them in a neutral position, you know, when we kept the nursing home issue kind of isolated to COVID-19 specifically.
Excellent. Mayor Bennett, I'll call you out just a minute here. Is there anything you would like to ask regarding this? I know it's an issue that we've discussed and you know, think it's important for our community and our businesses to understand that these are the protections that are afforded to them as they move forward and try to navigate the new normal. Any specific questions you've received regarding it?
No, I just think that in general, I mean, Mark, you did a great job of explaining that. And I think you guys have, you know, thought this through very well, because obviously that potential lies out there. You know, we've had issues with a few of our employees even who, you know, question things, and you just kind of wonder what's lurking out there. So no, I think that everything I've heard, this covers it. So I would think this sounds like a really good bill, and I think it should cover everybody. So appreciate everybody's hard work.
I don't see any more questions popping up in the chat box, so I would toss it back to any of our three legislators. Do you have any closing thoughts for the group?
We'll let the home turf folks go first.
Well, I would just add that Mark and Senator Messmer and a lot of other folks have really put in a lot of time. I think, you know, one aspect to keep in mind that this also does protect our manufacturers who've been making PPE. And, you know, we as a state have asked a lot of them to step outside their box and quickly make things to help the effort. And this bill does protect them as well. So I think that's important to note. But I appreciate Senator Messmer taking the time today to join us and all the effort he's put into this bill. He always does really well on deep dive legislation, as our community has benefited from in the past.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that.
I was just going to chime in and say, thank you all for all you do. It's been a crazy year, and you as well have had to pivot and shift and protect your employees, and there's a lot of fear, and especially at the beginning there was so much misinformation. And I think we're at a better part now where, as an employer, you can protect your employees a lot better. And so this legislation, I just think it covers a lot of bases that are needed. So thank you, both of you senators, for all your work. And I'll stand by my SB1 is better. So thank you.
Senator Messmer, any closing thoughts?
Well, I appreciate your time. I've always enjoyed my visits to the Vigo County Terre Haute community. I've been up there, quite a bit the last few years, and always enjoyed the people that I've met and the relationships I've been able to build, and look forward to continuing to, work well with your local legislators, and try to continue to bring good policies for your region and for the state. Help build economic growth for the area, and just glad to be a part of it.
I do, and thank you. We appreciate your support tremendously. And I think I've mentioned this before, but we do have your picture up on our wall with a group of individuals when we were over working on the casino legislation. So
Okay.
I do greatly appreciate all your efforts for our community. We did have one final comment that came in the chat. I'll just mention it quickly, not really a question related to COVID-19. Jane Nichols, who's with the Vigo County Education Foundation, wanted to say that she appreciated your co-authorization of SB 342, which would provide a 25% tax credit on donations to public schools or public education foundations. We were disappointed that Representative Pfaff's HB1002 did not receive a hearing in Ways and Means. We're also grateful for Senator Ford's previous support of similar legislation. Jane will be coming over on Tuesday to provide testimony as the bill is heard in the Committee on Tax and Fiscal Policy. She's asking for if you have any other recommendations to garner support, but thank you for your support. So fair warning, you're going to hear some testimony regarding this on later this week from our friend Jane.
Okay, look forward to seeing her on Tuesday.
Just a couple of housekeeping notes as we close up. The Chamber is providing a weekly update on legislative activities to our membership. We're pushing that out via the newsletter that goes out via email on Thursdays. It's also posted on our website. We will be following along with both SB1 as well as HB1002, along with a variety of other bills. I think maybe we're up to 6 or 7 other things that we're watching right now, and then providing some additional context on how we think those might impact the Terre Haute, Vigo County, West Central Indiana business community. So be watching for those. I would also add our next forum is March 19th, again, sponsored by Wabash Valley Asphalt. And that one will be a little bit more of a general legislative update with our local legislators. So we'll cover a lot of different bills in that discussion. So again, thank you all for joining us today. I know it's a little bit early for a Friday morning, but the information was just really informative, and really, appreciate you all taking the time. So again, the recording will be available on our YouTube page later today. Thank you all.